Welcome, IT changemakers, to the DEX Show with Tim Flower and Tom McGraw. Let's get into it.
Hello, changemakers. Tom McGraw here. I'm flying solo today as Tim can't be with us this afternoon. And I want to say a few words about this episode. You know, it's a real privilege to be able to co-host the DEX Show. Really one of the most enjoyable things I know Tim and myself and a lot of people involved in the show do as part of our work lives. But I say this without exaggeration, that I've never been more excited to welcome today's guest, or to welcome any guest to the show as I am today. And I'm going to say a quick word about why that is, even though the guest in question, Charles Petzold, has already heard this story. I'm going to subject him to it again before I give him a welcome. So it was about sort of 11 years ago when I started my career in technology. And I was sharply aware, having come out of the publishing industry and having come out of a sort of a pre-career in writing for various publications and such, like I was sharply aware that my knowledge of technology, my understanding of it was pretty limited. And I was given a recommendation to have a look at Charles's book, Code, The Hidden Language of Computer Hardware and Software. And if you've read Code, or if you haven't, it basically walks the reader through the development of computers all the way back to the sort of the harnessing of electricity itself, and step by step by step, and in such a sort of clear and compelling way, not only in terms of the writing, but the illustrations which are used to make it tangible and to make it real, that I found myself reasonably well brought up to date. The gaps in my awareness reasonably well filled, and first and foremost, with a sense that I'd really encountered a really special author, and I feel that way to this day. So I'm absolutely delighted, Charles, to have you on the show. Thanks so much for agreeing to do this, and thanks for your wonderful writing.
Thank you. It sounds like you're the ideal reader of code. We always, when we're writing a book, we think about an ideal reader, who that person is, and try to write directly for that person. I didn't have you personally in mind, but you seem to fit the bill.
We spoke a few weeks ago, of course, about doing this show, and you mentioned that you did have an ideal reader in mind who might be very analogous to me, but wasn't exactly me, which was you and your fellow colleagues in coding's mothers.
Yes,
I believe you studied specifically. A textbook could allow them to know what it was you did for a living, right?
Just that none of our parents seemed to understand what programming was all about, and that's what I wanted to convey. And also, I knew that a lot of my colleagues in the computer industry did not have this background of digital logic design. So even though they were completely competent programmers, they did not understand really what was going on below the surface when a computer added two numbers together, for example. So they seem to benefit also from the book. None of our, as far as I know, none of our parents actually read the book. So my mother certainly didn't.
I'm sure some parents have read the book since, though, and maybe to catch up with their own children's career. But tell me, Charles, about your own road to becoming a sort of technology writer primarily, and what brought you to that point.
Well, I attended one of the first school, I believe it was the first college to require all freshmen to take a programming course. And this is a small engineering and science school called Stevens Institute of Technology. It's located in Hoboken, New Jersey, not far from where I grew up. And so freshman year, 1971, I had my first programming course there in Fortran. And I didn't like programming. It was with punch cards, and you submitted the cards to the guru behind the desk, and he'd flip through them and see that there are a bunch of errors, but he'd put them through anyway, and you get all this paper back. It was not a very pleasant experience. But after I graduated college, I had this interest in electronic music, and I decided that I would try building electronic music instruments. And I had no idea how to do this. And I went to the local Barnes and Noble bookstore, which had a good technology section, and I found a couple of books on digital circuitry. And I had no formal background in that, and I started learning how to wire chips together, CMOS chips and TTL chips. This was around late 70s, let's say, and gradually learned enough to build a couple electronic music synthesizers just for myself. I do not have
Mm-hmm.
I do not have an entrepreneur gene, so I did not conceive of this as something that I would actually sell and market. Um, but I eventually ended up building a digital synthesizer, which is a synthesizer that generates sine curves digitally, and then combines them into to make more complex sounds, controlled by a Z80 microprocessor. And so all the knowledge that went into this, I learned basically from scratch. But by the time I finished it, I had a very good background in digital circuits, digital logic, and also microprocessors, and also assembly language, 8-bit assembly language. And I knew later on, I started writing for PC Magazine in 1984. I knew that a lot of people did not have this background. So I knew I had kind of a special knowledge of this stuff. And as early as maybe 1986 or so, I thought of this idea to write a book that would explain how a computer works, starting from the basics. Um, and that idea kicked around in my head for about 10 years. So until I finally started writing the book and went through a lot of ups and downs in my personal life between that time.
Oh, really? Well, so much there I could pick up on, but you have led me to the next question I really wanted to ask, which is about your style, because it's difficult to describe what it's like to read your work, because on one level, it couldn't be so easily on the surface level distinguished from a textbook.
Right.
You are explaining what things do and how they work in a very pragmatic way that's as clear as possible. And as I mentioned, you're using illustrations to convey that knowledge. Nonetheless, if you take someone like me, there's no way I could have waded through textbooks on this stuff. And I'm interested in what, I guess what you think your style is, and what distinguishes your approach from the even more kind of purely pragmatic approach. And with that, what writers have influenced you to reach that style, to hone that
Wow,
style?
that's some question. And one, I also, my career also included writing a bunch of programs on programming applications for Microsoft Windows. One of, not the first book about how to write Windows apps, but one of the first, maybe the second. A book that called Programming Windows, and it went through like 6 editions over the years. Um, but specifically when writing that book, because I had learned Windows programming from based on very scanty documentation and a tutorial that somebody at Microsoft had put together, I was able to remember my pain in learning this stuff, in struggling through it, and finally
Right,
getting to a point where
right.
I could get a Windows program actually on the screen. So remembering my pain was very helpful in kind of anticipating what questions the readers might ask. Somebody said when they were reading my book, they kept coming up with questions that I would like answer in the next paragraph, which is just great to hear that. Um,
Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
also, um, I particularly with something like code, and that it is just technology, but I try to impose a narrative on it. Um, and I think narratives, stories are important to, this is very essential to the way that humans understand information. if it's delivered in the form of a story, it's more easily assimilable. Assimilable. Uh, the For example, if you're reading a history, the historians do this all the time. History does not have an intrinsic narrative. It's just a bunch of
Mm.
events, some of which are random, some of which are colliding with each other, some of which are contradictory. And it is the historian's job to impose a narrative on those events. And sometimes that distorts the events, but it's the only way we can really assimilate this. When I was in college, one of the other things about the college that I went to is that they liked, even though it was entirely science and engineering, they liked people to have a well rounded education, which means that we had 4 years of
Hmm.
humanities courses. And one of these humanities
Right.
courses was a history of science and history of mathematics. Now, I knew there was science and I knew there was history, but I did not know there was such a field as history of science. And so this was a revelation that you could actually study what went on in the past. One of the books that we read was called, I wrote this down, Sleepwalkers by Arthur Koestler. It was published in the late 50s, but it's basically the story
Hmm.
of Copernicus and Kepler and how these guys uh, found out that instead of the universe circling around the Earth, the Earth was circling around the sun. Very simple, but it was an essential shift in perspective. And Arthur Koestler is a historian, as a social scientist, and so he was able to impose a great narrative on this, and um, so that it became a comprehensible story. Much later on, when I was first started writing programming books, there was a book by Davis Sobel called Longitude, and it was the subject uh, sounds horrifying. I mean, it's back back in the day, several centuries ago, ships could easily find their latitude, their distance north or south. In
Hmm.
the middle of the ocean, you observe Polaris, the North Star, and the angular distance from the horizon of the North Star was your latitude. Very easy.
Hmm.
Longitude was extremely difficult um, because it relies upon what time it is. And so 1 hour, because of the Earth's rotation, 1 hour of time is equivalent to 15 degrees of longitude, which is a long distance. Um, so there were prizes awarded for somebody who could figure out how to determine longitude at sea. And the answer was to have a really accurate clock, and a clock that would not be affected by temperature or the bouncing waves or anything like that. And Davis Abel told this story. It's a wonderful book. It was published in 1985 called Longitude. Um, so they put a narrative on it and made it a fascinating story without any technical stuff, no math or anything like that. And so that book was really an inspiration to me, that you could write a book about a technical subject but make it available to the common reader.
Wonderful. And Arthur Koestler, of course, most famous as a novelist, right?
Yes,
Even
yes,
even before his
yes.
work as a historian. So I'm interested in your feeling about the importance of your readership or of the general public at large having some sense of like clarity about the machinations behind the technology that
Mhm.
dominates so many of our lives, right? I mean, do you look at it as something that there is a prevalent ignorance to it, right? Like we these things, our phones, etc., may as well be magic to most people, to the degree of understanding that most people have. And that's not to say that there's not plenty of people in the laymen and laywomen who do understand, who do make an effort. But for most of us, it's beyond our comprehension. Yet these devices completely dictate to many degrees our existence. Do you think that disparity of understanding is a social danger? Do you think it's, do you feel compelled in some way to try and bridge that gap beyond just the pleasure of writing and creating books?
I, I used to feel more strongly about this than I do now. Back when I was first working with back when I was first writing the books about programming for Windows, we wrote in C. And C is, even though it's a high level language, it's considered a rather low level, high level language because you're dealing with things like pointers and you can access memory directly and stuff like that. And people who had a background, programmers who had a background in assembly language, understood pointers right away because that's all you do in assembly language. You work with pointers and memory locations. But people who did not, C could be a real mystery. Um, so in that sense, I always thought that programmers, in learning programming, you should start at the beginning. You should learn an assembly language and then work your way up to the high level languages. So you knew, so at least you had a little feel for what the high level languages were doing. Um, I don't think that's practical anymore. I think many high level languages are so complex that you need to devote all your time to them. Um, uh, in the past several years, I've been programming mostly in JavaScript, and it's a big language, particularly when you bring in all the stuff you can do in the browser, and then there's graphics APIs and WebGL, 3D API, and there's enough to learn without going all the way back to the beginning. Um, as for
Mhm.
as for the common user, the non-programmer user, boy, I don't know. I certainly wanted people to understand what the computer was doing at very basic levels because I think it's fascinating. I think it's very cool how you can uh, essentially take little switches in the form of transistors and wire them up to do logic and make more complex circuits out of them and eventually build a computer. I think that's very cool. And I think inquisitive people would be interested in learning that. But is it essential at this point? I don't know. Um, so that is my
It seems,
doubt.
I mean, the ship may have sailed as well. No, I mean it would
Yeah,
take quite the course to update so many billions of us affected and
yeah,
so profoundly by technology. And yeah, it does anticipate a question I had for you for later in the discussion, but I might insert now, which is we see with AI, natural language models, etc., even knowledge of coding, as you described, which can be so kind of such a pyramid of such a pyramid structure of awareness becomes, even for professional coders, feasibly in the near future, somewhat redundant. And in general, then we almost all of us, even then professional technologists, are operating with technology that is even unfathomable or
right.
unreachable. And I wonder if you have specific concerns about that or about AI in general, or does it become maybe even more important to at least have a general awareness of what the rudiments of computer hardware and software are founded on?
Yeah. Well, uh, one of the ways I thought about code was that it demystified the computer. My book code, that it demystified what the computer does because I don't like people thinking that technology is magic, um, even though it appears that way sometimes. With A few years ago, as I was approaching my 65th birthday and wondering if I was going to retire or not, I realized that if I was to continue in the program in the computer industry, I would either have to go deeply into machine learning, or the other option I thought of was quantum computing. Um, Learn about how to write programs for a quantum computer or machine learning, and I wasn't really enthusiastic about either of these courses, and I decided that I would let younger people with sharper minds attack these subjects, and I would just kind of like fade away and do my own thing. Um, so I've had some reactions to AI that are mostly emotional. Um, when we first started seeing poetry and prose that were created by chatbots that was looked like written by a human, I had a gut revulsion about it. That
Yeah.
uh, this putting things into words is a very human activity, and that we were creating a program that could mimic that by searching through a wealth of pre-existing sentences and how they were constructed, and where a sentence that started in a particular way, where that sentence would end up with. um, I revulsion is the primary reaction that I had. um, uh, because the sentences were being constructed without any understanding of what the sentence meant, and b, without the shared experiences that humans have when we converse with each other. um, I know that it is possible now that a to have a AI program write a novel or let's say a short story, and to have it seem completely plausible that you might mistake it for something that a human being wrote. Okay. Uh, do I want to read such a story? I don't think so, because when I read fiction, when I read stories, I feel as if another human being is communicating with me through this medium. Who is communicating with me when I if I read a story or a poem constructed by an AI program? Um, would you read? I'll take an extreme example. Say there's a story with a sex scene in it. Would you believe? Would you believe that sex scene? It just would not uh, be. It might sound plausible because it's based on perhaps millions of sex scenes that have been written throughout fiction. It's based on those. It's drawing information from those, but it's not conveying an authentic experience. Um, and there was somebody, I'm on Facebook a lot, and somebody posted something about AI music, which, like, really, I had a really bad reaction to that. And so I wrote a blog entry: can an AI compose music? Which was just a series of questions. Um, but something composing music that has not had the experience of dancing, is that plausible? I don't think so. Um, human beings, we drum on our bodies, and we sing and stuff like that. An AI has never had that experience. So can an AI compose music? Well, it can look at all the music that's being composed and like find structures in those, in the melodies and the harmonies, and put them together in novel ways. Um, but I because that is not coming from a human experience, um, I don't see why I should even listen to it. However,
Mm.
however, let's take another leap. Um, Say that we create an AI that we that convinces us that it is sentient, and can actually put together unique sentences in the same way that humans do, or compose music in the same way that humans do. That's even worse, because if you have created a sentient being in software, it's like birthing a child. You have responsibility for that. Would you unplug a computer running sentient software? Ah, that's a extreme eth- moral problem. And so, yeah, am I nervous where we're headed with this? You sure am. I don't think we can think lightly about software that has become sentient, if such a thing happens. Um, and I'm not. I don't believe that humans are special. Uh, that are the workings of us are anything but mechanistic. And so I don't see a real intrinsic obstacle to building something that's sentient, but it's an awful lot of responsibility, and that scares me. Fortunately, I'm like in my early 70s at this point, so maybe I won't have to actually experience that. As I said, when I retired, it was like I'm going to do my own thing. I'm going to leave the rest of the computer industry to young people. This is they who can think about this stuff in a fresh way. So, so I
Let's
become
go.
an old codger who doesn't like the new stuff, all this AI stuff, But um, does that answer your question?
It certainly does. They're very reasonable concerns that many of us have at any age, I would say. Now, in fact, you kind of teed me up rather well as well, because I think your focus has always been a kind of a historical focus, right? The narrative of the evolution of this technological paradigm. And you've described your book, The Annotated Turing, as the work you're proudest of. That sort of somewhat less accessible or immediately familiar to people than this theme of code. So I would love, however, to discuss it somewhat. So first of all, what you do in that book is you explore Turing's famous paper on computability. And I wonder if you could maybe frame what that was and what its legacy and significance was to you that engaged you so
Yeah,
much in it.
I first encountered Turing's paper, um, which he wrote basically as a graduate student in when he was 24 years old in 1936. Um, when I was researching the first edition of Code, I was going back and trying to look at some of the major historical documents of the computer industry, and Turing's paper was certainly one of them. And when I first looked at that paper, uh, it was incomprehensible to me. It used a lot of weird Gothic lettering, and there was some. It referred to things I was not familiar with, some mathematical stuff that I become rusty in that I hadn't thought about for a long time. And I went through a few pages of Turing's paper and thought to myself, this paper is important historically, and somebody should really write a book explaining what this paper is all about. And once I have that idea in my mind, somebody should write a book. I'm a goner. It's and I realized this would be a hard book to write because I would need to understand the way I wanted to do it, and the way it turned out was that I take Turing's paper and I cut it up into individual sentences, sometimes partial sentences, and annotate it all. So the book, my book, The Annotated Turing, has Turing's complete paper with my discussion of it and my explanation of what Turing is doing, and like three pages of historical slash mathematical background leading up to it, but also interweaving Turing's own life in with my analysis of the paper. So I was very happy with the way that book turned out, um, particularly since it was a struggle to write. And but what the paper is about, Turing, there was this problem in mathematical logic of first order mathematical logic, which is the simplest type of logic using ands and ors and nots and stuff. if you have a statement in mathematical logic, the German mathematician David Hilbert posed this problem. Can you determine whether this statement is provable or not? And this was known as the Entscheidungs problem, the decision problem. And it was an open problem. And Turing and another mathematician were working on this at the same time. And what the way that Turing decided to approach this problem was by building an imaginary computer, which is now called the Turing machine. Turing obviously did not call it
Mm-hmm.
that. And and then to express these statements in mathematical logic within this computer, and to write a program that would interpret this. And he saw this determined that the Entscheidungs problem was unsolvable. And basically, it's that uh, if you have a faulty program, you can't write a program to figure out what the problem is with that program. Um, who essentially comes down to who can debug the debugging program. Um, so
Mm-hmm.
what Turing's paper established, besides this answering this problem in mathematical logic in the negative, is that we had a much better understanding of what computing was. We say now that certain languages are Turing complete, which means that they are equivalent to a Turing machine, and certain languages are not. Notoriously, HTML is not Turing complete. It is not a programming language. There are certain things you can't do with it. But any language or machine that is Turing complete are basically equivalent, meaning that they can solve the same problems. Now, it wasn't um, immediately obvious to people developing the first computers that you could have a general purpose computer. There's a famous statement by, I want to say Howard Aiken, I'm not sure, saying that uh, we'd have certain computers for science and certain programs for business, computers for business, and it's unlikely that these would ever be the same computer. But of course, we know that's not the case. Um, we have different types of. Some computers can, well, all computers now can make sound and show pictures and show graphics and stuff like that. So, but the actual computing, what's going on inside the computer, all computers are basically equivalent. So that was an important outcome of Turing's paper. Another important outcome was that, like I alluded to before, you can't write a debugging program. You cannot know whether your programs are working correctly or not, ultimately. And that is scary because we're using programs in so much stuff, so they're so the self-driving cars, you can't really know if that software is working correctly. Um, and that's basically a problem. Of course, it goes back to humans doing their own logic, their own computation. You can't determine if something that you're doing is correct or not. There's this intrinsic uncertainty throughout not only human reasoning but computer reasoning as well.
Mm. I'd like to pick up on that because what when we look at the evolution of technology, we it's allied to the evolution of
Oh yeah.
commerce, right? Like it's often it's commercially stimulated, and it's actually quite difficult for us to imagine if you could have some sort of hypothetical quasi-communistic society, how technological development would have occurred at what rate or at what
And
pace, or
there's
in
also
what
a
direction.
engineering stream as well. The first computers were
Yes.
developed mostly by engineers wanting to do engineering problems. But yeah, the commerce was extremely important in later development. Yeah.
Without a doubt, right down to, in terms of directing and the flow of innovation and also the
Mm-hmm.
speed of innovation, right? So you just mentioned
Mm-hmm.
self-driving cars,
Mm-hmm.
which, wouldn't necessarily be a focus outside of the commercial opportunities aspired by, an entrepreneur, and you described yourself as lacking entrepreneurial instincts yourself, or having that kind of so I'm just interested, and it is a bit of a vague question, but I'm interested in your general reflections on the role of what is commonly called capitalism in the development of technology, and as you've just kind of, I feel, alluded to, the potential dangers that come from a kind of external agency that directs and accelerates development of technology, which is the commercial factor. What are your
Yeah,
reflections on that dynamic? If you,
this is not something I've really thought of profoundly, but like I mentioned a little earlier, um, I'm on Facebook mostly because a lot of my older friends in the computer industry are on Facebook, and some personal friends as well are on Facebook, and I'm on Facebook every day basically. I
Mhm.
post about politics. I post about books I read. I post about movies I've seen. I post about concerts I've seen. I post about TV series that I like. Um, and um, I used to, a few years ago, get into a lot of political arguments on Facebook. The I have That has not been the case in recent years because most of the people who abhor my politics have befriended me. So I'm alone in a bubble. Um, I have no experience with things like TikTok or Instagram, but the idea that people are getting a lot of their information through these little videos on TikTok is kind of weird. The idea that Instagram is really screwing with the heads of adolescents, particularly adolescent girls, thinking that they are inadequate in terms of what they're seeing online. Um, all this is extremely distressing. Uh, I grew up during the time of the Vietnam War, so I know that America has been divided before. Um, but we all knew at that time, we all had a basic sense of reality, and we were all watching the same news programs. Um, and now we're not. Uh, what was the question again? I've gotten off on this.
I was asking for sort of the commercial motives behind technological development,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
I think you kind of
yeah,
have a very
yeah.
interesting
The
progression that
yeah,
relates
one
to
of
it subtly, right? Which is that the commercial motive for placing people in their
right.
algorithmic bubbles, right? That's through
Yeah.
technology, but that
I,
has quite a kind of cleaving effect
and
on society.
I don't know who came up with this observation, but it is that if you are not paying for something, such as Facebook
Mhm.
or Twitter, then you are the product.
Move
Yes,
on to that.
yes,
Yes, I believe that's very
yeah.
powerful. Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
due to stuff that I've posted, I get a lot of targeted ads about concerts of classical music, which is the algorithm is working to target these ads to me. Of course, many of them
Yeah.
are located in states that I don't go to. But the algorithm is not smart enough to know that if it's advertising a live concert on Facebook, it's preferable that it be in the city where you live. The algorithm doesn't
Rather
get that.
limited.
It's
You have to, spread your net sometimes with digital advertising, as many of my colleagues will testify to. But in general, Charles, I mean, kind of touches upon what you were just saying. Clearly following your career as a writer, accessibility is something important to you, not only in the notion of making knowledge accessible insofar as it's being clear, but in terms of making your work accessible to as many people as possible. Like with the second edition of Code, people could enjoy it online as well as as well as in book form, free of charge, if I'm not mistaken. And talk to me about that motive, and I think your current project that
Right.
you were describing a few weeks ago is you're leaving the book behind, you're leaving the publishing industry behind, you're going straight to the people, right?
Okay. This is a topic that I like to talk about. When I wrote the first edition of Code, I had this problem of presenting circuits in on the printed page, and we did a lot of diagrams. There was more diagrams in that first edition of Code than I think any other book that Microsoft Press had done ever. Um, and we had a professional illustrator doing them. I would sketch them out on paper, but one of the things I wanted to do in these circuits was to show what wires electricity was flowing in. So I wanted to make these wires red, and because that added another color, the publisher was like, "Oh, it's going to cost a little more money, and could we do shaded, maybe not red?" And then, no, red means electricity. It's a very intuitive. So I got that red. Otherwise, I would have been very unhappy. But still, you require multiple diagrams for something. If you have just a simple logic gate, you have four different cases. So I want so the diagrams be basically repeated four times with different red colorings, and particularly, and then when you get into flip flops. You have to have this diagram, the same diagram over and over again, showing the different states. And when it came time to write the second edition, um, and it was mostly because the book was considered a perennial, an evergreen book, they say in the publishing industry, of something that would not age, unlike all the programming Windows books that I've written that have become obsolete. But still, there was some stuff in there that hadn't that aged well. Um, so we wanted to do a second edition, uh, and it was like over 20 years later. But this time, I wanted to have a website, a companion website, um, so that you could actually go on this website and play around with logic gates, um, and flip flops and stuff like that, and adders. Uh, and it's all interactive graphics. It's all graphics using the HTML5 canvas written in JavaScript. And the website is called codehiddenlanguage.com. And it's no paywalls, no ads, no pop-ups of stuff, no cookies. It doesn't ask you for cookies because it doesn't keep cookies, I don't track the users. It's like it's
Sure.
it's as free as any as I don't know what. Wikipedia is also like that, with no ads and no pop-ups and no paywall and no cookies. But not very other not many other websites. So
True.
anyway, so
True.
so this I built this website, and I had always been a desktop programming guy and then a mobile programming guy. So I had done, up until that time, very little JavaScript programming. So it was just immersing myself in JavaScript. The the Canvas 2D programming language was very similar to stuff I encountered before. So that was no biggie. So I'm very proud of this website. I mean, you can go on this website and play around with logic gates. You can play around with flip flops. You can play around with adders, and eventually you can play around with a simulation of a real computer. Um, and I hope that um, between each of the diagrams, there's a little explanation for each of the interactive of graphics. But there's that shows the cover of the book and where you can buy the book and stuff. That's the only real ad on the website. So I hope people go to this website and kind of play around and say, "Oh, I'd like to learn more about it." But as I was doing that website, it was like, why should there be a book and a website? And you're reading the book and you want to learn more about this, and you go to the website. And even if you're reading an ebook, the ebook is not going to have the interactive graphics, and it would be great if it did, but it doesn't. The technology is a little behind in that way. So, and then I realized, damn, if I didn't care about making money, uh, I could have done that entire book on the website. People could be and
Yeah.
integrate the graphics right in with the book. Of course, my publisher wouldn't like that at all. I mean, the publisher basically owns the rights. Even though I'm the copyright owner, the publisher is licensed to, has the sole license to create and distribute the book. So I could not do that on my own. I could not put put code on a website. So while I was researching the first edition of code, I got interested in what's called the prehistory of computing. Computers, the first computers were really built at, let's say, late 30s, early 40s, what we recognize as computers. And they were first made out of telegraph relays or telephone relays, and then they were made out of vacuum tubes and then transistors and ICs. But they started out doing the logic gates and flip flops that we know. But anything prior to that is the prehistory of computing. I categorize Alan Turing as part of the prehistory of computing, at least his paper. He eventually got into working on real computers because he didn't have any real computer in mind when he created this imaginary thing. But Charles Babbage, even though what he conceived of would have been Turing complete, and it would have been equivalent to a modern day computer in terms of what the processing it could do. Of course, it would have been very slow, but it could do that same type of processing. It would have been Turing complete. So, but Charles Babbage is prehistory. There are. I got interested in the Jacquard loom, which used punched cardboard to create patterns in silk weaving. And that was an inspiration for Babbage of having punch cards. I got interested in analog computers. There's this whole area of analog computers that is really crazy. In the 1920s, there was this thing built called the differential analyzer, which could solve differential equations using a bunch of spinning disks and stuff like that. I did a talk about this.
Wow.
The talk is on my website, the video section of my website, charlespetzold.com. There was a tide predicting machine, which is basically a special purpose analog computer that was created by the Scottish physicist William Thomson, otherwise known as Lord Kelvin. This was in the 1860s, and you have a tide gauge for a particular port, and this tide gauge goes up and down, and you record the height of the tides every hour for like a year. And it's very irregular because tides don't go up and down very steadily. But then you apply Fourier analysis to it. You extract all the sine curves, and then you build a machine that can reproduce these sine curves and add them together. And then you start cranking it, and the combined sine curves go out to the future, and that predicts the future rise and fall of the tides. Brilliant thing, and it's fascinating to me. So I wanted to write about all these things. And I even went back to logarithms. And logarithms date back. John Napier disclosed his invention of logarithms in 1614. So that's like 4 centuries ago. But this was a way for people to make multiplication and division almost as easy as addition and subtraction. Now, when I grew up, I had a slide rule when I was in college. The first pocket calculators were just being introduced. There was this one of our classmates had like this really expensive pocket calculator that I don't think it actually fit in his pocket, but his wealthy parents had given him as a graduation gift from high school, and it was like, wow. But eventually, once you could do a multiplication and division just by punching numbers in, logarithms as an art form for scientists and engineers kind of disappeared. But we still, but to me, I see logarithms everywhere. I mean, most obviously, we talk when there's an earthquake, the Richter scale, it's logarithmic. Um, but sound, decibels, is logarithmic. The piano, the musical scale is logarithmic. Money, currency is logarithmic. We don't have $101 bills and $102 bills and $103 bills. No, it goes in a logarithmic progression: 1, 2, 5, 10, 20, 50, 100. Um,
Mhm.
so uh, there's there's all this stuff, we perceive things logarithmically. We perceive time logarithmically. Um, so I wanted to write a book that first showed somebody living now how it was back then when you had to do multiplication and division using logarithms, and first using a table of logarithms, um, and then using slide rule. And I thought, I'm going to have to have a companion website for this, because people are going to want to play around with the slide rule, and I'll have a graphical slide rule that you can play around with. Um, and as I started thinking more about this, I thought, why don't I just do the whole book on a website, and
Mhm.
have narrative there, have I can be as free as I want with pictures. I can put in interactive graphics whenever I want. um, I can use mathml to put in math and uh, all this stuff. So that's what I'm working on. um, and it's proven to be a challenge. But interestingly enough, um, the website is live. I've Because I didn't want to just be testing everything on my own machine or on a virtual server. The website's live, and um, I haven't actually disclosed the URL, so nobody's seen it.
Okay.
But uh, the first two chapters are basically there, and I'm like working on, because what I realized was that a lot of books of logarithms have trigonometry tables as well, and they have logarithms of trigonometric functions. And yes, of course, when people were doing multiplications and divisions for navigation, for surveying, for observing the heavens, they were doing multiplications and divisions of logarithmic functions. So if you have a logarithm of a sine right in a table, it cuts down a step. So I decided to
Mhm.
have some chapters on trigonometry, and showing how logarithms of trigonometric functions help solve trigonometry problems. But really, the real trigonometry you want to get into is the trigonometry of the surface of the Earth, which is spherical trigonometry, which is used to be studied by scientists and engineers. I don't I don't know if anybody is teaching a spherical trigonometry course anymore. If it's just a discipline that's mastered by people who need to do math about on this around the surface of the Earth and GPS and stuff like that, but also astronomical calculations. So, um, and this is all like 3D graphics. So now I'm getting not only into the HTML5 canvas using 2D graphics, but also into WebGL, doing 3D graphics and WebGL. And I looked at like some wrappers for WebGL, and I looked at 3JS, and was working with that for a while. And then I said, I really want to work with WebGL directly, and it's proving challenging, but it gives my brain some exercise. So if people want to actually look at the first two chapters and not be too critical, because the book kind of there's other chapters, but they kind of degenerate into phrases and instead of actual paragraphs and stuff that I'm like playing around with. But if people want to do this, the URL is, and it's the title of the book, lostartoflogarithms.com.
Wow. Thanks,
So
Charles.
you're the first
DEX Show exclusive.
Okay. And what I beg people, do not look at this on a phone or a tablet. Please use a real computer, because on a phone it's just, and the website doesn't even work. It doesn't work right on. I have a Mac, an iPad Mini, and it doesn't work good on that tablet either. I haven't tried it. We have an Android tablet kicking around here. I haven't tried that either, but it's really best on a real computer, desktop or laptop.
It's the least we can do,
Charles. My email address is on it in case people want to have feedback or something. But this is, I've given myself like this really big challenge, and I don't know when I'm going to finish this book, because I have another couple of books in mind that are more like real books. I want to do some real books. This is an experiment of an entire web-based book with interactive 2D and 3D graphics, and it's going to be great for this book if anybody cares about reading about logarithms. But I think I'd like to do a real book next after this. After I'm done with this, whether it takes me into my 80s or not, I don't know. So.
Well, look, thank you so much for that exclusive for the listeners of the show.
Yes.
Come on, if you heard that, I'm not even going to include it in the show notes. I'm not going to say, well, we'll put the link in the show notes. I'm not going to do that, Charles. I want it only to be the people who've listened to the full conversation and are ready to kind of dig it up for themselves, because then you'll get the real quality committed feedback that I think the project needs to do.
I'm gonna have to have a link to this somewhere. I don't know. It's gonna come soon, but there's some.
Well, you tell me. We can put it in the show notes. We can put it in the show notes if you want more people just to see it. But and I hope that sounds like a very consuming project. I hope you do get to some more typical books in the future as well, because I'm an old-fashioned reader. I do like the book form myself. And look, it just remains for me to say thank you, Charles, for coming on the show. Thank you for your writing. Thank you for being so generous with your time and your thoughts. And it's a great pleasure to talk to you and to meet you. It's been fantastic.
Oh, thank you so much. This has been a sheer pleasure.
To make sure that you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast player. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, make sure to leave a rating of the show. Just tap the number of stars you think the podcast deserves. If you'd like to learn more about how NextThink can help you improve your digital employee experience, head over to nextthink.com. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.